Hi, everybody, and welcome to tonight's special Midsummer Night's Town Hall meeting, virtual Town Hall meeting. I'm Chris Carosa. We'll be talking to several very great guests and hear their ideas about what an independent Greater Western New York will look like. This is a special edition of the State of Greater Western New York report, and it's brought to you by... Each week, our community makes history. Each week, you make history. And each week, there's only one source to turn to for the first take on history. You know what that is? Subscribe to the Sentinel right now to discover the history being made in your own backyard. The Linden Honeoye Falls Lima Sentinel. More than just your news, it's your history. Welcome, everyone, to this edition of the State of Greater Western New York Report. Join us each episode as we discuss fantastic topics ranging from history to science to the strange and the wonderful, as well as the treasured spirit with which our region has infused America. We challenge you to consider all things Greater Western New York, from our region's very beginnings to how it inspires, how it empowers, and why it is so admired. Here's the host of the State of Greater Western New York Report. Hey, that's me, Chris Carosa. I cut that off because you don't care who I am. Actually, you care more about the guys who are behind me, the three guys who I'll introduce in a moment. But first, let's talk about why we're having this meeting and what it's all about. Well, each week, as the announcer mentioned earlier, the State of Greater Western New York report reports about things that are all around Western New York. And two of our three largest watched shows dealt with the topic that we're going to be talking about tonight. Now this, you can't hear me. Uh-oh. Well, that's a problem. Yes, of course you can't hear me because I didn't put the mic on. But now you can hear me again. Welcome, everyone, to this special edition of the State of Greater Western New York Report. Tonight's topic is actually two of the three most watched shows that we've had in the first 6 months of the year. So that's why we're going to be talking about it. And it's not just the Sentinel, my paper, that's doing it. It's a lot of other newspapers across the Western New York region who have co-sponsored this show, from the Alfred Sun, the Batavian, the Batavia Daily News, Livingston County News, Neighbor newspapers, several newspapers. All were interested in promoting this idea of a town hall to see what you people could think about and talk about this subject of what an independent Greater Western New York would look like. So let's get right off the bat. Actually, let's talk a little bit about definitions. The State of Greater Western New York report really talks about the 17 westernmost counties in the state of New York. Now, most of you would think of Western New York in a little bit different way than that, but this is actually historically the original counties that comprised the Genesee country. That's what Greater Western New York used to be called for about 150 years, really up until about World War II. And after that, we kind of went away from that name, and they started splitting up the region in a bunch of other ways. But originally, this is what we were, and this is what we're about. There's a reason for that. We're not going to get into the history tonight. We're really going to talk just about the practical matters. So we'll start off. We're going to be talking about three different proposals that will create an independent Greater Western New York. One is just basically to split the state. Two is to have what's called an autonomous zone. And three is to, in effect, nullify laws that really pertain less to the values and the needs of the Greater Western New York region. Each of our guests will take one of these positions and explain why that position is the best position, at least in their mind. So we're going to start off with our first guest. He's Assemblyman Steve Hawley. Steve is from the 139th district of the state of Western New York, and he is, I'm sorry, I'm getting ahead of myself there, Steve. I'm actually saying what you want to say. So Steve is, basically he represents the area, I guess, Monroe County, Genesee County. Where else, Steve, are you representing?
It's the west side of Monroe County, all of Genesee County, and all but one town in Orleans County.
Okay, so why don't you go ahead, kick us off. I'm going to get the timer on, and we'll give you 7 minutes to tell us why an independent state, is the way to go.
I don't want to impede on anyone else's time. So I'm going to start off with a few topics that kind of highlight the differences between those of us that live in upstate, Western New York, and downstate. Bail reform, the SAFE Act, out-of-control spending, The New York state budget, $212 billion larger than Texas and Florida combined, and each of those states have more population in them individually than we do. Medicaid spending, almost $90 billion, 42% of our entire state budget. That's larger than Texas and California combined. Again, each of those states have more folks that reside there. Solar and turbine being pushed upon localities and individuals, all state controlled with very little local control. My Gold Star family bill, giving free college tuition to folks who have lost a loved one serving their country. The scaffolding law, campaign finance reform, the farm death bill, public safety and respect for law and order, the green energy proposals being cast about by downstate folks, which would cost those of us that actually use roads and highways and have driver's licenses 55 cents a gallon more. All these policies are adopted by downstate-dominated legislators. Upstate New York is an area of our nation with its own unique fingerprint, an area distinct in several regards from anywhere else in the country. We're proud of the garbage plates in Rochester, chicken wings out of Buffalo, New York, the greatest sports fans in the country, the Great Lakes, the Finger Lakes, and Niagara Falls, and a whole lot of untapped economic potential that we're being held back from realizing because of the political dominance of downstate New York. To put it plainly, I believe the only way of assuring that the people of our region have a say in their own affairs is for us to become a state of our own and take control of our own backyard. For far too long, we've been stifled by the ideologically based restrictions on industry and business. My bill, I call it the Two New Yorks bill, would simply put on the ballot in November a non-binding referendum question for every voter in the state of New York to vote on, seeking their opinion on something before we actually spend money on commissions, etc., studying it. And it would be unique, because when the SAFE Act was passed, you were sleeping and weren't asked a single question. My bill would ask people what they think about the simple question, should New York be divided into two states? Yes or no? Unfunded mandates have hamstrung our local governments and restricted their ability to serve the needs of the immediate communities they serve. We live in a big state, and even here in upstate New York, we have a diverse set of communities with unique needs, and we should give county governments the flexibility to serve their people appropriately. Making our region its own state would free county governments from the financial commitments they've been held to because of the heavy-handedness of downstate lawmakers, many of whom ignore the vast economic and cultural differences between upstate and downstate counties when implementing policies that suit the needs of the latter. For years now, we've all heard about the exodus from this state of folks and businesses. While some politicians blame the weather, we know that it isn't the chilly winters that have driven people out of communities that they've been raised in and moving them away from their extended families. What's driving people out of New York is the state's continued effort to make it harder to succeed here, harder for ambitious people to fulfill their dreams and create opportunities for others within their communities. People want the best lives possible for their families, but the sad truth of the matter is that for most people, that would not take place here in New York unless we change our policies and create a new New York. You see, in creating a new New York, we will have the opportunity to create economic conditions suitable for entrepreneurs that could reverse the course of this exodus, and instead encourage people to move here either to work or create businesses of their own. Allowing our southern tier counties to make use of the natural gas resources alone would create an entirely new industry for our region, and that would go on to create countless jobs and bolster our tax rolls, putting an end to years of economic stagnation, and finally giving the people of New York hope for a future greater than downstate politicians would allow them to have. Lastly, I just want to touch on the justifications for splitting our state that go beyond economic factors and discuss some of the reasons why our region will be better served making important policy decisions for itself. The people of upstate New York have a respect for limited government, respect for our constitutions, and the rights contained within it not shared by many of the big government politicians that dominate our legislature. We support and we respect law enforcement. By and large, we object to criminals being released back out onto the streets after committing a crime and recommitting against our society. This is the disastrous bail reform that was passed a year and a half ago. And we want to allow judges to decide what's best when it comes to criminals. While you were sleeping, the SAFE Act, as I mentioned earlier, a gun control bill, passed in 2013. And if we were our own state, we'd have the ability to make our laws reflect the majority of attitudes of the folks who live here where we do. Aside from this, we saw throughout the COVID-19 pandemic the real harm, poor decision making by a governor elected by downstate people. That's what happened to our economy. Lockdowns and other onerous restrictions on businesses and education persisted for far longer than needed, crippling our local economies. If we were our own state, we'd be able to elect a governor responsive to our concerns and reflective of our needs. Making a new New York is the only lasting solution that will give the people of our region a real say in their own affairs and their destiny, and truly unlock the economic potential of our region. This is an area of our nation truly distinct from any other economically and politically. And the time has come to give people the opportunity to vote whether they support dividing New York into two states and gain control of their own destinies. Thank you.
Thank you, Steve. That's a very good presentation. Now, we'll say that if we were to become our own state, it would require majority approval by the state assembly and the state senate. In addition, then, the federal government, both the Congress, the House of Representatives, and the Senate, would also have to vote in majority in favor of us becoming our own state. So that's what happens to become our own state. If you want to take the feds out of the equation and just have that decision be within the state itself, well, that's what Senator Borelli's going to talk about. Senator Borelli, George Borelli, is in the 57th district. That is essentially across the southern tier, covering several counties. George, why don't you tell us a little bit about that, and then start on with your presentation.
Great. Thank you, Chris. First of all, thank you very much for convening this tonight. And I'd like to thank my fellow presenters, Assemblyman Hawley and Jim Ostrowski. And I would just briefly, the 57th Senate District spans western New York and parts of the southern tier. It makes up parts are all of 4 counties, all of Chautauqua, all of Cattaraugus, all of Allegheny, and about half of Livingston County up in the Finger Lakes. And I'm proud to hear that it looks like we have representation from each county in my district on tonight. So I heard some of the places you were calling off, Chris. Just a little background on myself. I am a business person, an entrepreneur, and my wife and I are still in business today. I became a county legislator back in 2010, and it was a part-time position, and then I decided to leave full-time private sector business when I ran for county executive in Chautauqua County in 2017, and then ran in a special election to replace Kathy Young after she retired in 2019. So it's been quite a run, and along the way, my focus has always been how can we speak loudly and clearly to represent Western New York in our region in Albany. And it's a challenge, as we all know. And that's why this proposal, I think, is a proposal that would work well, because what this does is it splits New York State into 3 autonomous zones. We have a bill that's introduced in the Senate. It was originally introduced by Senator Rob Ortt in 2020. It's Bill S-5416. And essentially the 3 zones would be New York City, the 5 boroughs of New York City would be one zone. Then known as New York, Montauk, which would actually be the most of Long Island, Nassau, Rockland, Suffolk, and Westchester counties, and then New Amsterdam. These are, again, of course, these just working titles, right? New Amsterdam, which would be the rest of the remaining counties in upstate New York. when I look at this proposal, it simplifies things in the sense that we do not have to get literally an act of Congress in order to split the state, but rather we would still remain one state with 3 zones. And it's about, to me, it's all about local control. As I agree with everything Senator Hawley said, all the things that separate us from the folks in New York City, particularly the 5 boroughs of New York City. But keep in mind the folks on Long Island also have big differences with the 5 boroughs of New York, and they would in turn have their own autonomous government. These 3 autonomous zones would then all have representatives in a downsized token state government. And not to get into all the details, we don't have a whole lot of time initially to do this, but when you start thinking about what are the benefits of that, one of the biggest things that we suffer from is one-size-fits-all government in New York State. We have one-party rule with the Democrats controlling the Senate, the Assembly, and of course the governor's mansion. And what that has created is taking these philosophies in New York City that are often, as Steve mentioned, far, far from what we believe the vast majority of people in upstate New York believe, and they're imposing those values on us. And it has had, unfortunately, dire results. We've seen most recently since the Democrats took control of the state Senate in 2018, you've seen bail reform and the spikes in crime, all those things that Steve talked about that fundamentally make us different. So now we would return to local control. And that would mean if you want that in New York City, you can have that. If you want that on Long Island, that's up to you. But here in upstate New York, we would not only will we have I think a more unified government, but also we would return to the idea of letting local governments, our county governments, our local governments, make decisions that were taken away from us bit by bit with the loss of home rule in our state government. The green energy example that Steve gave is a perfect one because it speaks to the fact that they're going to override even our own environmental rules that we have in place through DEC and others to fast track and force these projects down our throats. That would not happen in an autonomous zone like we're talking about, because largely those decisions will be returned to local government, into the people that on the ground in those areas. I think that's an important distinction. And I will address also, people will say, well, we cannot survive without New York City. The revenues that they provide are because essentially they contribute more to upstate New York, for example, than we give in taxes. But I think there's a fundamental difference that we're missing here. We are operating, and again, as a 10-year veteran of county government, we are operating in county governments, for example, where 85% of the budget in Chautauqua County, where I was county executive, is unfunded state mandates. So we don't have a revenue problem. We have a spending problem. And that would change with an autonomous zone. So we would likely see a much more scaled down social welfare system. We would see far less burdensome regulations, as Steve mentioned, things like the scaffold law and others that, for example, things that make New York State the most hostile place to do business in the nation, the highest taxed, and also the most overregulated. What does that do? Well, that creates, for example, the cost of doing business here with just something as basic as workers' compensation insurance. We border Pennsylvania here in most of Western New York, as you all know. In my district in particular, we border Pennsylvania. The cost of that insurance here in New York State is somewhere in the neighborhood of 20 times higher than it is in Pennsylvania, and that creates a competitive disadvantage. Imagine a region in upstate New York where those rules and regulations, those burdensome regulations and taxes are no longer in place. It would create a return of industry and manufacturing, return of our family, of our children that have gone away, and that to me is what will make us more prosperous. It's the idea of creating a more friendly environment, which will spur growth, return manufacturing, and in the end, have the economic driver that we would need to be independent from New York City. Lastly, while I believe that Steve's proposal is certainly a sound one, the idea of putting up to a vote what people think, we will still be at the mercy of New York City, and we will still be at the mercy of the federal government. I think one of the challenges we face with that is that creating a 51st state would give the people in the Northeast two more senators in Congress, and that may be a tough hill for us to climb.
All right. Thanks again, George. There, I keep covering up Jim with my head. Jim, I'm sorry. That's not Jim Ostrowski. He will now tell us how we might be able to do something that requires neither the federal government nor, in effect, the state government, just maybe the county government. And it's a method that was used with some success with regards to combating the SAFE Act, at least a few provisions in it. Jim, tell us a little bit about yourself, and then tell us about what nullification means.
Well, I'm an attorney and author, and as I'll mention in my remarks, I did live in New York City for 8 years. So let me get right into it so I don't go over time. Upstate is the county of downstate, and downstate means New York City, and that really means Manhattan. We're the playthings of what I like to call Sardine Can City. And I can say that because I lived there for 8 years. It is a city filled with people crammed together like sardines in tiny high-rise apartment buildings, but who barely acknowledge each other's existence on the street. It is a city that craves big government as a substitute for the communities they so obviously lack. Familiarity breeds contempt, and crammed in like sardines, the Manhattanites come to loathe and fear their fellow humans and let the big government protect them from their neighbors. These Manhattanites have created the biggest, most intrusive state government in the country, with the possible exception of California. But currently, the People's Republic of New York is in first place for government tyranny, according to the great study, Freedom of the 50 States. Sardine Can City can afford to have a high cost of government, as it has long been viewed as the capital of the country, if not the world.
Jim, you want to Jim?
Yeah.
Can you move a little closer to the mic because you're a little muffled?
Sure. Sorry about that. Is that better?
Yeah, much better.
Sure. So people from all over the country and all over the world come to New York in search of the brass ring, and are willing to suffer through its high cost of living, dirty and dangerous streets, and overall unlivability. Also, they have Wall Street, a cartel of paper pushers created by the federal government in the 1930s. So the Fed prints money out of thin air and gives those dollars first to Wall Street to make the quick profits to keep the whole operation going. Yet in upstate, we have the same cost of government, but without the artificial subsidy of being the world's capital and financial cartel. No one comes to Rochester or Buffalo because if they can make it there, they can make it anywhere. Thus, Buffalo and most of upstate has been in a state of decline for 50 years. With the takeover of the state Senate by the Democrats, there is no break on the growth of government, so the current trend will likely to continue until near third world conditions are created upstate. Separation is not an option, it's a requirement of survival. If we had our own state, we could resemble our neighbors in Ohio and Pennsylvania, states with much smaller government and much more vibrant economies. I went into a McDonald's in Ohio recently, and get this, they had table service. In Cleveland, the business parks are greater in number, larger, and the buildings in them are larger and newer than in Western New York. Each year, those states put about $50 billion into the private economy so that in the People's Republic of New York are pissed away by government spending. $50 billion here and $50 billion there, and pretty soon you're talking real money. We could be like Ohio and Pennsylvania, but with one of the wonders of the world, and if we ever got the Manhattanites to stop dictating what happens on Buffalo's waterfront, the best inland waterfront in the country at the confluence of a Great Lake, a river, and the Strait, the so-called Niagara River.
Jim, could you lean closer into the mic?
Sure.
You keep going, you keep dimming, so maybe the paper's on the mic or something like that, but try to get as close to the mic as possible.
I will do that. I apologize. Sorry for that. Our colonial masters in New York City will never let us leave voluntarily. They need our power plant. They need our water. and they need to dump their garbage onto our pristine lands. Let's not wait for permission. Let's just do it de facto, like the American colonists started governing themselves long before they threw the redcoats out in 1776. We need our own name, our own flag, our own map, our own sign. We need local officials, particularly sheriffs, to have the guts to tell state officials to go to hell when they try to enforce the left-wing state government's crazy new unconstitutional scheme. Let's have grand juries refuse to indict any local official who refuses to enforce tyrannical state edicts. Let's get well armed, as the right to bear arms is the guarantor of our sovereignty. We need to ostracize the quislings in our midst who collaborate with our colonial masters. Stop sending legislators to Albany. Let's have our own rump legislature and shadow state government. Let's choose an honorary governor for our New York state. Let's separate, to paraphrase Herbert Spencer, by ignoring Albany to death, using brains not brawn, and by the means of peaceful and legal direct citizen action. Violence is a failure of the imagination. Eventually, our colonial masters in Manhattan and their minions will leave us, just as their cousins, the Redcoats, left America in 1783 and left India in 1947. This sounds bold, but what option do we have? Continue the mass exodus? Endure another 50 years of slow, torturous decline? Let me close by quoting my favorite play. There is a tide in the affairs of men which, taken at the flood, leads on to fortune. Omitted, all the voyage of their life is found in shallows and in misery. On such a sea we are now afloat. We must take the current when it serves, or lose our ventures. Thank you.
Jim, you had a minute left.
I said it all. I'm giving that to the audience.
You're giving it to the audience. All right. For some reason, your mic was going muffled. So when you're sitting up and looking straight at the camera like this, it seems to be working very well. But
I apologize for that.
That's okay. That's okay. We've had a bunch of questions. So people ask the questions, and I will read them as we go through them, or at least put them all together. We had a couple of different themes in the questions, and the first one I've got from a number of people, both who are here tonight and also who called me today, who said that they want to see the replay. They couldn't be here tonight, but could you ask this question? And that is, this is primarily, I think, going to be directed at Steve and George. That is, even if we were to become our own state or an autonomous zone, does that really solve the problem? The problem being that we have a representative government that is population-based. So it means, in general, the big cities can push around the little countryside folks. They just don't have the numbers. Our government, the state government, is organized in a way that is different than the federal government. In the Senate, in the federal government, each state gets two representatives. So there's equal representation among all the states. The big states can't bully the small states. The House of Representatives, exact opposite. You do it by population, so in a sense, the big states could get what they want. So they kind of even things out. The Founding Fathers decided to even things out. There was a court case that Marl mentioned, and I'm not going to get it right, 1964, when the Supreme Court basically told the states that they had to abandon this, federal Senate construct. So the question is, whether we're a state or whether we're an autonomous zone, how do we get around this issue? So between Steve and George, let's one of you guys take it and see what both of you guys do it, but one of you guys go first.
Go ahead, Senator. I've got an answer.
All right. Thanks, Steve. Well, let me start off by saying that we had a bill which I co-sponsored that's been in for a while that does exactly that here in the state Senate, and that would be to go from 63 senators to 62 and give each county one senator, and then create that federal system. I think that's a good concept. However, I will tell you that the chances of New York City allowing that to happen, in other words, the chance of that passing, is slim to none, because they know that there would likely be a forever supermajority of Republicans in the Senate. If you keep in mind that Andrew Cuomo won in a landslide last time with only carrying, I think, 7 counties, so of the 62 counties. So that's certainly a signal to those big population centers, those 7 counties, that giving us a Senate that represents them equally is going to be an issue. So I don't think that would happen. In the case of the autonomous zones, when you start splitting things up and you take New York City out of the mix, I can tell you that that is going to have a profound and positive impact. The most radical, the most, I guess, the most overreaching legislation that we have in the Senate and the Assembly comes out of the 5 boroughs of New York almost exclusively. And that means that despite the fact that we have Buffalo and Rochester and Syracuse that may politically see a little bit different than Jamestown or Batavia, you do have, I think, a much better level of cooperation, and you see that now, even though in the way Republicans and Democrats upstate do interact in the state legislature. So I think it would fundamentally be better and much better than we have now. And I think the idea of the federal model in the state is just not going to happen here, unfortunately.
Well, let's go back on the autonomous zone. I think that the issue that they were saying is that you still have most of the population in the urban centers, and the urban centers have different needs than the more rural areas or the less populated areas. And if you still have representation based on population, that problem doesn't go away. Now, of course, if we become our own state, which, Steve, I think you can take this, if we become our own state, then it's different because you get to write your own constitution. So, Steve, why don't you talk a little bit from your end on how you think this might be best resolved?
Yeah, I just piggyback on what the senator said. Just look at the last 2 gubernatorial elections and the map of New York State and what areas voted for who, which areas voted for whom. And geographically, other than once, I think Erie County went with Mr. Cuomo, geographically, almost the entire state, including Long Island, did not vote for him. And so when you have a new New York, if you will, or even the autonomous zones, that map pretty much tells the story. So I don't think we have an issue with proper representation. You'd have a legislature, a new constitution, and we would have representation from even the urban areas, of course, and more from them, but not enough to certainly override, like happens constantly and continually, by downstate representatives. There's nothing that we can get through upstate, whether you're a Republican or a Democrat. Even if you slept with the devil, it's not going to happen. I had a Gold Star family bill that would have given free college tuition to Gold Star families. A Gold Star family, for those of you listening, is a family who lost a loved one serving their country or became severely disabled. That bill languished in committee for 11 years because an upstate guy sponsored it, and I'm a veteran myself. 2 years ago, we passed legislation that gave undocumented workers' children free college tuition. And I raised a question, a very loud question, when that was tabled or laid aside again in committee. We're going to give free college tuition to children of the illegal immigrants, but we're not going to give free college tuition to those unfortunate families who lost a loved one serving their country. It got a lot of play around the country, and the governor finally moved monies from within the budget so the Gold Star families were taken care of. That's a budget transfer. Unbelievably, unbeknownst to me, and I get along well with pretty much everyone, whether they're Democrat or Republican or where they come from, unbelievably to me, all of a sudden, my Gold Star family legislation was being voted on in the Assembly in the waning hours of this year's budget by the chairman of the Veterans Affairs Committee, who's never served a minute in the military. That, to me, was obviously a compliment, and I don't care whether my name was on it or not, it got done. But that's what happens oftentimes. We're too political, We disagree, but sometimes with vehement disagreements. We can do that, but we need to respect each other. And I can tell you, after 15 plus years in the New York State Assembly, and I'm a businessman like George is, I run a business, I'm a former farmer, and I have 12 employees. They don't have the slightest idea of what makes the world go around. And to be called out on the floor by one of the new socialist members of the New York State Assembly when I voted against providing $2.1 billion in the state budget for undocumented workers who didn't qualify federally for unemployment. When I voted against that, I was called out by one of the new socialists, and those of us that voted against it, as a racist, xenophobic capitalist. There is no place for me.
Steve, you mentioned socialist, and I have to say that one of the attendees, when we're talking about, the nature of, say, the cities of Buffalo and Rochester, one of the attendees just said Buffalo just essentially voted for a socialist mayor. So can we really rely on, say, a muted response from the major cities, even in Western New York, without having some sort of protection on this, say, geographic-based representation as opposed to just solely population-based representation?
Well, strange things happen in elections. I'm sure Mayor Brown was as surprised as the next person. It was a very low turnout. I'm not discrediting or taking anything away from the individual that won that. And I can tell you quite frankly, the new Socialist Democratic Assembly people were recruited by AOC in New York City to run against incumbent Democratic Assembly people. 7 or 8 of them won in a primary. And in New York City, you win the primary, you're in the election. And it's a very, very odd time that we're undergoing right now. And I believe that most people, as we move along, hopefully not in the too distant future, will say enough is enough.
So one of the attendees wanted us to define socialism, which is actually a pretty good question because it's very broadly ranged. Jim, you haven't been talking. If you want to talk into the microphone, you want to define socialism for us, so at least we're all on the same page on it?
Well, which definition do you want? It's one of these words that, it can mean a lot of different things. I think the classical meaning is the government running the economy. It can do that directly by, let's say, having government schools, or it can control by taxation, subsidy, and regulation. But I think if you're looking at how much of the GDP is spent by the government, that gives you a good idea of how much of the economy is literally socialized, and you can compare one state to another, one country to another. And it's mostly relative because some aspects of our economy are socialized. So
right.
1/2 of Medicare healthcare spending is government money, so that's partially socialized.
It's funny you say that one of the attendees just brought up Medicare and Social Security. So there is a social aspect in our government, but I think for the terms of our discussion, we're really talking about probably an overbearing amount of government control. Again, it's subjective. And I don't think we need to try to define it too much further than that, because we do have several other questions that we've got to get to, including this other one that was a lot of people ask this question, and that is the financial question. If you talk to people, I think, George, you touched on this a little bit, and maybe Steve did just in your dealing. If you talk to somebody who's against the idea of Greater Western New York becoming its own state or becoming independent, whatever, however you're going to slice it, they're going to say they can't afford to. They can't afford to because the state is giving us more money than we're giving the state. I was talking with the Democrat chairman from Yates County who said exactly this. They had maybe a little about, say, $4 million or so in revenues, and I don't know if I'm getting the numbers right, but they had, say, $6 million in state highway funding. So how do we answer that question? How are we going to be able to pay for this? Because that's a question that a lot of people have.
Well, let me just jump in. Chris, we don't. Go ahead, Steve.
No, go ahead.
What I was going to say is we don't have a revenue problem. We have a spending problem. That's first and foremost. And in a state that is freed from burdensome regulations, from high taxes, we will generate more revenue. I mean, you go back to the days of Ronald Reagan, and go back to Kennedy, Jack Kennedy. He lowered the top marginal tax rate from 90% down, and Reagan did the same thing, lowered it. And what did everybody say? Oh my God, you're going to bankrupt the government. They're not going to have enough revenue. And the coffers overflowed with revenue because it freed up capital and it got people motivated to work. As I said before, right now, the biggest competition that we have in Western New York, particularly in my district, isn't China, it's Pennsylvania. Because you literally can stand with one foot in my district and the other foot in the state of Pennsylvania. They're our biggest competition. If we can have more parity with them, that will bring back a lot of the businesses. There are a number of businesses that have left my district, my area, and pulled up stakes in Western New York and landed in Pennsylvania, in some cases literally a handful of miles away from where we were previously located. We can bring those folks back, which will increase revenue, and we will not spend what we spend right now on social welfare programs. We will not spend what we spend on some of the ridiculous requirements that it takes, which takes a lot of money to operate our government. There would be more local control of government, less unfunded mandates, and ultimately a government that costs far less than it does now.
Steve, I want to ask you a more specific question on this, because this really comes from my interviews with mayors and supervisors within the region that our paper covers. They bring up lots of examples where the money they get, I think, from sales tax goes to the state. Now, this is money that's due to them, due to their counties, and ultimately the towns and villages within those counties. And yet it goes to the state first, and then each year the state has to vote to release that money. So even though it's promised to those counties, it's not necessarily guaranteed. And how might that address some of the financial issue that we're talking about? Are we really miscounting the money that the state is giving us? Is it really money that's due us anyway? Can you elaborate on that a little bit?
Sure. It's called the float, and it's an old economic financial term where you keep somebody else's money for as long as you possibly can. Don't pay them any interest on it. Of course, we have no interest being paid now anyway because of the doleful economy we're in. And then eventually you release some of it in increments that's still cash floating. If you don't pay your taxes, your income taxes or your property taxes on time, you have to pay a penalty. To the government. If the government doesn't repay you, if you will, the money that you had subtracted out of your income for your income taxes, they float that money and don't give refunds. The senator and I'm sure, as he's the same as we are, where's my refund? Why does the state still have my money? They don't pay us any interest on that. They don't pay any time frame money on that. It's all about the government holding it as long as they can. And I'll piggyback on what the senator said with regard to the revenue issue. I can tell you that I've talked to some folks, many folks in New York City, assembly people who have asked me about my two New York's bills over the years. And they said, geez, Hawley, how the hell would you ever make it? We provide 67% of the revenue. How could you make it? Well, the senator and I are in business, and we make it by working hard, long hours, borrowing money, taking risks, hiring people, and making sure that we don't spend more than we bring in. Because in business, which the state of New York is, in business, if you do that one too many times, you're not in business anymore. But in the state of New York, if the money's coming in, they spend it, and they spend more. When we started 2020 budget process, we were pre-COVID. We were at $6.2 billion deficit, billion with a B. We have a spending problem. I'm not concerned about the revenue in a new New York. I'm not concerned at all about that. It's the spending, almost $90 billion on Medicaid from birth to grave. We need to take care of people. We need to assure that they're not suffering, but we don't need to take them from birth to grave. larger than Texas and California combined. Each of those states has more population than we do. We can make it.
So I want to thank Jason. Jason gave us a definition of socialism that came from Sherry Berman, who appeared on Capital Tonight, who defined the term in essence that they want people who want more government spending and more public interventions, and essentially that this is a segment within one political party that seems to be, well, you can read about it on the news, but I think that's kind of what we're talking about. It's more an overbearing kind of government approach to things. Jim, your microphone keeps going in and out. Are you do you have a earphone in your speaker, or are you, it's almost like there's
I'm not sure. I got a brand new MacBook Air. Maybe I'm doing something wrong.
Well, you see, I can hear you well, just like that when you're talking. But as you're talking, it's almost like there's a wave interference in the audio. But the next question is really going to be for you, which is why I asked about your microphone. So
I'll talk loud.
Okay, great. So Garrett is interested in your strategy, and he wants to know, how do you think it can be used? What would need to occur when Albany, say, threatens highway and education funding if a county decides that it's going to nullify a totally unrelated law? So how do you fight something like that?
Well, I never said it was going to be easy. All I'm saying is, I know I've been in politics since I was a kid because my father was a judge. I know the legislature is never going to let us go. So what are we going to do? Are we going to move? Where are we going to move to? How about if we just stay and fight? If we're going to stay and fight, we start the slow process, starting to act like we're separate, and eventually those practical problems will be resolved. We can start with our sheriff nullifying the State Act by not enforcing it. We can start with our grand juries, which, by the way, I'm a trial lawyer. Grand juries don't have to indict anybody. The prosecutors don't want to tell them that half the time. But there's things we can do incrementally. But I don't have all the answers in the long term. I'm just saying we're boxed into a corner. They're not going to let us out. You either leave the state and hightail it to somewhere where you may have to leave that place and you'll be, on the road forever, or you stay and fight and you use the tactics that Martin Luther King have used. Gandhi. The studies show nonviolent tactics work. Violent tactics do not work. That's actually in the social science literature. So I'm offering you a way to start this. I don't know how it's going to end. I don't pretend to have those answers.
I'm gonna add something that appeared in the news today. I don't know if you saw it. It was reported from a couple of different sources. There was a study that was done. Let's see if I have it here on my screen somewhere. It was conducted by YouGov Brightline Watch. And what they did is they proposed splitting the United States into 4 or 5 different regions, in a sense, seceding from the United States. And they asked people all across the country, all different political parties, whether or not you would agree with this sort of secession. All across the country, no matter what political party, there was massive support for this. So Jim, you're talking about like a say a non-radical approach to solving this problem. That's what you're suggesting. But here we have, say, maybe 2/3 of the Republicans and almost half of the Democrats, whether they're from the South or they're from the West, all agree with the secession model, which is definitely a pretty radical model. So we can't not talk about this issue, even if the answers are hard, or even if we don't know all the implications of what we're talking about. Yes, you have to start the discussion in order to discover what the limits of the solutions are and maybe how to get around them. So it's very relevant, and I didn't plan on this. This news came out today, so it's kind of an amazing coincidence. But there was a question here, and I think this is going to go to George, because this is not a So, Steve, you're out of this one, because the question is, how would the options ensure that Albany government stops its overreach? Well, if we're a separate state, we don't have to worry about Albany anymore. But if we're an autonomous zone, we're still playing at the whims of Albany, aren't we? I mean, can't they say you're autonomous today, but, oh, next year different people are elected, so you're not autonomous anymore? How does an autonomous zone, preserve that autonomy forever? Is there a way to do that, George?
Well, yeah, the way this bill is structured, it would be done through a constitutional amendment. So and a constitutional amendment requires it to pass in 2 consecutive sessions of the legislature. So in order to undo that, you would have to do the same thing in reverse. So were this to pass, it would be a change to the Constitution that would ratify that these regional autonomous zones would have that autonomy. Therefore, and what you would have in a statewide federal government would largely be just a token government, that would largely deal with judicial appointments, things like that. So it's the idea of making this done through a constitutional amendment, which does 2 things. Number one, it makes it difficult to undo just by a simple majority vote in one session. Number 2, the governor does not have to approve it because it is a constitutional amendment.
All right, so let's go on. I think we have time for maybe another question or two. This really comes from an often cited article that appeared in Syracuse, I think in 2019. And it issued 5 points of why New York couldn't, or Western New York couldn't afford to finance its own breakaway idea. And one of the points, and you've addressed most of them already, but one of them had to do with funding for schools and funding for prisons. So I don't remember if it was Steve or George who talked about the bail reform idea, but maybe this goes hand in hand with that a little bit. But this is really the financial aspect. How does the state funding go for prisons? And are we getting more than we're putting into that? And how would it be solved in the future? So, Steve, let's start with you on this one, because I think you talked about it earlier.
Well, if we continue down the path of crime does pay as opposed to crime doesn't pay, we won't have a need for any more prisons. Some of the policies coming out of Albany are just mind-boggling. Folks are being released on parole and immediately registered to vote, even though they're still serving their sentence. We have folks that are allegedly going to be dismissed from state prisons if they've served 20 years out of their life sentence because they're 55 years and they ought not be in prison anymore. We have defunding discussions. We have disrespect for law enforcement. We have folks that no longer want to serve in law enforcement. And that used to be one of the most honorable, sought-after positions, not just in New York State, but across this nation. And we're at a crossroads, a very serious crossroads right now. I just read an article yesterday that Rochester, per capita, has the highest murder rate in the country. And Buffalo has the same issues. We have a disaster, and we'll change it. I just don't comprehend how when someone is arrested for a crime, they're not brought to justice and served for the crimes against society. It's just mind-boggling. I've got my shades pulled now here in my insurance office. I don't want to have somebody come up to the window. And I'm not being facetious. I do the Buffalo Slow Roll bike ride every single Monday night. And we ride all over downtown Buffalo. One never knows what could happen. And Teresa and I have talked about, do we continue to do it? Well, we're going to because we enjoy it. We think we ought to be out and about. But I just am blown away by the prison issue. If most of the prisons, which this article talked about, Chris, if most of the prisoners come out of New York City and we have 2 New Yorks, they'll have to build their own prisons and take care of the folks that commit crimes downstate. We've got the garbage coming up here. We've got the prisons. We've got the solar farms and the wind turbines, all of that energy going downstate, or the vast majority of it. So we've got the prisons and we've got the garbage, and they want our power.
George, I'm going to direct the education side of this to you. Again, let's assume that it's an autonomous zone, so we can make our own decisions. what's to keep the powers that be, whoever's in charge of this autonomous zone, from just continuing to promote this idea of big government, say, for example, by continuing to put money into an education system that may or may not be justifying the value of it. I'm not saying that it is or it isn't, but it's the idea of where's the money going to come from to pay for this version of the SUNY system.
Well, again, I think you're looking at this, whether it's primary education or secondary education, you're looking at it through the lens of how it's being done now. And I think we're going to have serious conversations as to how will this have to differ. In Chautauqua County, where I live, we have 18 school districts for a population of barely 130,000 people. Those are questions that have to be addressed. You look at models from other states. County governments are essentially the school district, and we don't want to sacrifice our kids' education. We don't want to do anything to dilute it, but at the same time, New York State spends more per pupil than any other state, and our results are typically somewhere in the middle. So there's certainly room for improvement in that sense. It's not because of the hardworking teachers; they do a great job. It's because we have a lot of layers in there that have created, I think, a lot of inefficiencies. And if we want to make this work with an autonomous zone, we're going to have to rethink every form of government operation and see what can be done better and more efficiently.
Thank you. Jim, I'm going to give you the last word on this segment because I know that there's a special weather alert that just came out for Buffalo. So in case you get zapped off the line, we want to at least hear what you have to say. How would you sum up what we've heard right now?
Look, I know there's not that much time, but I actually looked into this whole issue of downstate subsidizing us about 10 years ago. So if you go on Google and Google does downstate subsidize upstate, no, James Ostrowski, it's in Buffalo Rising, which is a local, pretty good website. It's methodologically flawed. It's not true. It's misleading. And it's done by a downstate civic organization. So the source is faulty. Look, during the Industrial Revolution, Buffalo and Rochester were some of the leading industrial powers on earth. If we just got the government off our damn backs, we're as good as any people on the planet. As I think the senator made that point, or maybe it was Assemblyman Hawley. This is a unique, wonderful place. We're fine up here. Yet, New York City, through its agencies in Albany, off our back, and we'll have another industrial revolution, just like we had the first one.
All right, thanks, Jim, and thank all three of you, Steve, George, Jim. We're going to break out into breakout rooms right now. So everyone in the audience, I'm going to unmute you. I'm going to unmute everyone here. Unmute everybody. Oops, I just muted everybody. So, hold on a second here. So, George, if you have to go, that's fine. But Steve and Jim, if you want to stick around, you can. They're going to be in the breakout rooms for about 15 minutes. And after that, they will be able to come back to us, and they will tell us how they vote on which of the three options. So everyone now has the ability to unmute yourself, so you can do that, and you could put your camera on so we can see you. So go ahead. Yep, there we go. We're seeing people like that. What's going to happen is I'm going to hit a button, and you're all going to go into a breakout room. Here are your instructions. You have 15 minutes to do this, and there will be a timer on this. I want you to talk about this because a lot of people were talking in the chat room, a lot of really good ideas. So talk amongst yourselves. Then I want you to select a spokesman who is going to speak for your particular group, and we'll have them come on and talk. So they have to be okay with talking on this thing live, and that part will be recorded. The breakout session's not going to be recorded. So, and we want the spokesman to kind of give us an overview of what you talked about, but I also want everybody within that breakout room to vote for their favorite choice. And I want each breakout room to come out with one favorite choice. Okay? But everyone stick around, because after the breakout rooms are done, we're going to have one final vote, a general meeting vote, where you're going to be given a poll to ask for vote for one of the three choices by yourself. So got it? It's a two-step process. Process 1, by breakout room, talk it, make your votes. Process 2, individually. So I'm hitting the button now, and hopefully you can all go into your rooms. Okay, so Gary, I see you there. And let's see, there's a couple others here. Oh, everyone's coming back now. All right.
All right.
So that was okay. So guys, here, everybody unmute themselves so we can talk. Anybody having problems unmuting themselves, let me know in the chat. Going down one by one and giving you all a chance to unmute yourselves.
No, you know, he was in the middle.
Okay, so.
Hang on there, Mike. It's coming.
Well, I can tell. That was,
all right, well, as long as we got the Susan, let's see if I can find you.
Chris, there's about a 10-second delay. So when you unmute on your end, it takes about 10 seconds for us to get it and go back to you.
Okay. Who else is not unmuted that wants to be unmuted? Just let me know in the chat. Susan, I couldn't find you. Where are you?
Susan.
Okay, there you are. You're on now. All right, you're okay. Okay, Jason. Let me see, Jason. You guys are familiar with the concept of a one-man band, right? Well, that's me right now. So, all right. So we had 3 breakout rooms, and who was in the Ellicott room that wants to talk for them?
Chris, can you hear me?
I can hear you.
Okay. I have a toolbar on the bottom of my screen. I don't know if the people that are not able to unmute, if you just scroll your cursor to the bottom, because you control it, but for some reason we can do it ourselves. So if they go to their toolbar, they can click on the microphone to unmute.
Okay. All right. So I think everybody who wants to be unmuted is muted. So who was in the Ellicott room that wants to talk for them? Ben, Diane, John, Mike.
We had nominated John.
John, you wanna kind of give us a rundown of what you guys talked about and then how you voted?
Well, we talked about the financial roll of the dice, basically, and it was almost agreed that we're willing to take the chance. New York City keeps saying they're sending us more money than we send them. I don't buy it. I've seen the spin. I know how they work their numbers. You know, in New York City, it's one of the few places where most people can squeeze a quarter and give you 26 cents back. So I'm tired of being held hostage by the Big Apple. They don't really adjust or agree, rather, with the norms of outside of the 5 boroughs. Then we talked about the SAFE Act. You know, how overnight basically people were made criminals just by the number of bullets that were allowed in the magazine of their weapon of choice.
Right.
And we also talked about an assault weapon. I'm sorry, but nobody can define that thing to me. I'm sorry, black, pistol grip, flash suppressor. That's a sporting rifle.
Right. Well, it's so how did you guys end up voting for in terms of which of the 3 options did you want?
To be honest with you, Chris, we ran out of time.
You ran out of time to vote?
Oh, yeah.
Oh, guys, you're messing up my experiment here. All right, well, why don't you take a vote amongst each other? So why don't you do this? Send messages, everybody in the Ellicott room, send the message to John, which you could do in the chat room, just where it says to, just say to John Hodges. Send a message who you vote for, and then John, come back to me. Remember the three choices are state, autonomous zone, and nullification. Let's go to the parish room next. Who was voted for the spokesman role in that one?
I don't know the name of what our room was.
Yeah,
Okay,
the parish room was us. Mark,
Oh.
did you want to
Okay.
speak?
Yes. Yeah, we had 5 people in the parish room. I didn't recognize the name of the room, but of the 5, we did take a vote. We talked about it. There's a lot of concern about the ability to actually perform these things, especially the 2-state. We have to go through the U.S. Congress basically, so the probability is going to be heavily zilch. But 3 of the people would like to see that one if that's an option that we have to go through. 2 people like the regional for a variety of reasons. I'm the loner that basically I don't like any of the options, because what we should do is basically just recognize New York State's Constitution already solves the problem if we were allowed to follow it. And the U.S. Supreme Court overstepped its its authority when it told states that they cannot structure as a republic. I mean, the U.S. Supreme Court doesn't have that authority to say that, but it did it anyway, and every state changed, which is what's causing this problem. So anyway, I'm the only one that voted that way. The other 2 people, other 4 people voted 3 in one case and 2 in the other, because we allowed multiple votes.
All right, so what was the one that got the most votes again? I missed that.
Most vote was a 2-state system.
Oh, the separate state? Okay.
Highly unlikely that'll happen.
Well, that's all right. I mean, this is just a game we're playing now more than anything else. All right, Sullivan room, you're the last room. So what did you guys talk about, and how'd you end up voting?
yeah, you may not like this, Chris, because we came up with a 4th approach.
Oh, no. Okay.
Yeah, well, so it's really utilizing all 3 in tandem. One initially in the early part of the conversation, we had a vote for nullification and then a vote for the 2-state solution. And as our conversation went on, we really thought the nullification approach was a great way to pressure Albany immediately to get their attention, and then go for the 2-state solution, with the fallback position being the autonomous zone. So in a negotiation, you're going to start, with
Right.
looking for everything, and then perhaps in that negotiation, they'll at least allow us to operate as independently from Albany, but using nullification in the meantime to put tremendous pressure on Albany and focus their attention on our dissatisfaction and how to accommodate the people living in the region.
Okay. So, all right. So we'll figure out how to. John, did you get people telling you what they wanted in the chat? Did you have an answer on that?
I did, Chris. I did. I think that as a group, we were leaning towards autonomy.
Okay. All right. So interesting. 3 options, pretty much 3 different answers. Now we're gonna launch the poll. So I just started a poll. Everybody can vote for their favorite choice individually. If you have a 4th choice, unfortunately, that's not an option right now. Maybe. I mean, are you guys having fun? Let me ask you this question: were you having fun tonight?
Yeah.
Yeah. Do you want to? I mean, I don't know that they can hear you, but a couple of the guys are still on. You want to say yay for them or clap or whatever it is that you say, thumbs up, to tell them that you appreciate what they did?
How about snapping fingers?
Snapping fingers, whatever works. Yeah. So guys, there you go. Steve's doing that too. All right, and Jim is acknowledging it, and George, I'm sure, would too.
And Jim.
Yeah. So, all right, so we're getting the poll. Did everybody vote? Let's see. How many votes do we have? We don't have everybody yet. So what do you guys think? You think maybe we should do something like this in 3 months? Is it worth trying to do again?
Yes.
Okay. You guys like to see me work, don't you?
Yes.
All right. Well, I'm going to tell you what. Since I don't want to do all the work myself, I'm going to give you guys an option. Has everybody voted who wants to vote? We got 14 people voted so far. 66% voted. So let's just close the poll. And I'll tell you the answer is the winner. Actually, the winner by almost 2-1. Definitely 2-1. Separate state. 2-1. Autonomous zone was second, and nullification was last. Very interesting. And you see how the experiment was this. The vote, the poll, was like the House of Representatives. So that gave you, say, a population-based answer. The breakout rooms were like separate counties or separate states, each having one vote. And that gave you sort of a different answer. So the breakout rooms, everybody scored the same. That was kind of interesting, but that's the way it was. In the population vote, the separate state was the most favorite. Very, very interesting. Very interesting. Let me show you guys something that is now going to be available. Are you guys at your computers now? Oh, you're going to be on Zoom, so you won't be able to do this. But I'm going to show you a new site that we just put up. It's on and it's available right now. It is called the stateofgreaterwesternnewyork.org. You know how you were going and using that to go see what register for this thing? Well, this site here, and you can see it on the screen there. Let's see, if you want to go not in gallery mode, but in speaker view, since I'm the one talking, it'll pop up as the larger of the two things right now. And although maybe you'll see Susan Reed, because that's what happened when I did speaker view. All right, that's interesting. Anyways, here, Susan, if you want to mute your camera so that this could take the bigger screen. There we go. Let's see. All right, in either case, what I could do is, well, I'll just show you this screen here. So I'll go down this screen, and there's a take action step down at the bottom here, and also up here, like a drop-down menu. And there's 5 different projects that you could really go into. Let's see, what if I closed Susan's thing here? Susan, I'm going to close your camera. Your camera is supposed to be off. So, yeah, for some reason I'm getting Susan. Is everybody else seeing Susan when you go into speaker view, or is it just me? Okay, well then I'm going to keep talking, and hopefully that will stay up on the big thing. Maybe it's because I'm the one who's talking that I can't see it. Anyways, if you go to this website, this drop-down menu, you'll see a few things here that you can get involved in, depending on your level of interest. I will tell you that if you're really, really interested, you want to do this get involved thing. Every week, every Thursday evening, a bunch of us get together and talk about these sort of things. And that was really the core group that helped put together this event. It wasn't just me. There was several people doing it that were here tonight. You saw them, Mark, Gary. I don't know if John is still on, but he helped too. But so you had people get involved, and you're definitely invited to participate in this group. I'll send you an email every Thursday morning with the Zoom link instructions, and you can chat about this with the rest of us, see where it goes. If you kind of want to get involved, but you just want to do it from a let's have fun project, then do the 1786 project. What we're going to be doing with that one is the birthday of the Greater Western New York is December 16th, 1786. We're trying to get all towns, villages, counties, and ultimately the state to say, hey, this is a great idea. Let's have a resolution proclaiming December 16th as the official birthday of the Greater Western New York region. another thing you can do is you can just sign a petition. Say, hey, I like the idea of an independent Greater West New York. It doesn't really promote any one of these three ideas. It just says, I like the idea of an independent Greater West New York. We can get the details later. And then lastly, there's two other things you can do. Every Thursday at noon, we have a live show. You can ask to be invited to be a member of the audience. It appears on Zoom, and the advantage of being live is you can ask questions like you did tonight. And then finally, the last thing here is if you want to get emails, just hit that thing. So I'll send you an email in a few minutes that goes through all this, so you don't have to remember it. But that's pretty much it. So anybody have any closing questions, either the speakers or people in the gallery here on Zoom before we break it off?
I just want to thank you, Chris, and all of those that participated, and all the other folks that presented. Dave DiPietro, I'm on his legislation as well as he's on my legislation. I think the most important thing to realize is that we are very, very different. We respect those folks that live in the boroughs of New York City. We respect folks that live in Long Island. As a matter of fact, my friend Fred Thiel, an assemblyman from Long Island, way out at the other end, has a bill that would make Long Island a separate state. A number of times over the years, Staten Island has passed legislation that would remove them as a borough of New York City. So there are all kinds of folks that live differently and have different perspectives on life. And this discussion tonight shows that we respect others, but we want to live our lives the way we want to live them. And so I want to thank everybody for being here. It was great to be part of this discussion. And it's very important to continue this because we're living in unprecedented times now. And we need to remember our founding fathers and how America was formed and how we have prospered and succeeded throughout the years.
Thanks, Steve. You reminded me, someone had asked earlier if we get a transcript of your opening talks or presentation. I think you guys had it written down. And if you do, if you can email it to me, I'll put it up on the site so that people can see them, especially Jim, since it was hard to hear you. If you're still there. Yeah, okay, great.
Yeah, absolutely. Once I correct some typos.
Yeah,
me too.
All right, yeah. And I'll let George know too.
Thanks for having me. It was a great program.
Well, thank you guys, all of you guys, and thank everybody in the audience for attending. Yes, this video will be available. I'm going to have to do some post-production work because some of it is coming directly from the studio, and this last portion where everybody was talking about the breakout rooms, that's very, very good stuff, and that was captured through Zoom. So I'm going to have to combine the two together. But as soon as I do, I will send out an additional email to everyone to let you know that it's available. But that's it for now. I want to thank everybody for participating, and we'll see you next time. All right. Bye-bye for now, everyone.